In the third Baltic capital I visit on my trip, the transition to Nordic is complete, and Scandinavia feels much closer than it did just a few days ago when I arrived in Vilnius. Tallinn is a sophisticated, modern city, home to a booming tech industry. It is the startup capital of Europe, with 4.6 times the number of startups per capita than the old continent average. Although that Tallinn is IT central is hardly the first thing I think about when I cross Viru Gate and enter the old town. This is medieval wonderland, and I feel like I've stepped back in time. With 2 kilometers of imposing walls and 26 towers still standing, Tallinn's fortifications are some of the best preserved in the world and certainly the most popular attraction in the city. Originally built in the mid-1200s, over the years the walls were strengthened and expanded. The first glimpse of the towers is enough to evoke images of knights and dragons and make me fall for Tallinn. On my first day in town, thanks partly to COVID, I even get 15 minutes entirely to myself in one section of the fortifications. There's something wonderful about walking up these ancient steps and along these corridors. With no other visitors around, it's also kind of eerie. I wouldn't be surprised to see a ghost appear from one of these mighty walls full of history. The section of walls with the best views of Tallinn is definitely the one around Helleman Tower, while the most touristy, and to be honest the one I like the least, is Kicking the Cook. One might say, with a name like that, how could you enjoy it? It actually means peek into the kitchen, a reference to the fact that this is the tallest of the city's towers and that from the top you could literally see into people's homes. Perhaps it's the cafes dotting the museum or the medieval flavored and often cheesy looking decorations, but Kicking the Cook feels a bit like a Disneyland ride to me. It is informative, but for me it lacks the authenticity of other sections of the walls. I still recommend it if you want to learn about the fortifications, but also because the ticket gives you access to the very humid but very interesting bastion passages. I head down to these limestone pathways to look at the city from a slightly different perspective. Originally built to shelter and move troops around safely, the passages were never really used for that purpose. In modern times, they became air raid shelters and even home to the city's punk community hiding from the Soviets. After Estonia's independence, the market economy came, but not everyone was able to benefit from it. That's when the homeless moved in. The passages were their chosen shelter until renovation began in 2005. In the final section of the passages, I find a carved stone museum featuring around 200 pieces including pillars, coats of arms, and portals. Aside from the creepy mannequins used in the exhibition, the bastion passages are something you should see when you come to Tallinn. Getting lost in the charming streets of the old town is perhaps the best way of visiting the city though. Town Hall Square is like a medieval fantasy materialized. If it wasn't for the modern signs and restaurant awnings, I wouldn't know that this is the year 2021. The square's most prominent building, the Town Hall, was completed in 1404, while its 64-meter tower was added a couple hundred years later. Nearby St. Catherine's Passage, with its pretty arches and lovely atmosphere, is perhaps Tallinn's most photogenic spot. Another important site in the old town is St. Olav's Church, with its impressive 124-meter bell tower. In its original form, the church was built in the 12th century. It was dedicated to Olav II, the King of Norway, which is a stark reminder of the historical bond between Estonia and Scandinavia. I smile as I think of how different this building is to the churches I've seen in Lithuania. It definitely feels more Nordic here than it did in Vilnius or Riga. And if you're after a hint of Russia, well, just walk up to Tumpia Hill and check out the Alexander Nevsky Orthodox Cathedral and its onion-shaped domes. The church was always hated by locals because it was built during the 19th century's Russification of Estonia. It was even scheduled for demolition in 1924, but there ultimately wasn't enough money to go through with the plans. I'm a sucker for a good view, and the best high vantage point in Tallinn, Kotuotsa viewing platform, is just a few steps away from the cathedral. I go late in the afternoon to catch the best light. From up here, I can see the whole of Tallinn, from the Baltic Sea and St. Olaf's on the left to St. Michael's Church on the right. I could sit here for hours watching the red roofs of the old town sparkle in the sunshine, but the cold breeze and the disgruntled tourists annoyed by my long photography session tell me it is time to go. While Tallinn's most popular attraction is its impossibly beautiful old town, there is as much to do outside of the medieval core as there is inside. This is where, the following day, I discovered a modern and very cool side of the city, as I go souvenir hunting in the antique section of the bustling Balti Jam Market, named after the train station next door, and explore the shops and art galleries of the Telliskivi creative city. Telliskivi reminds me so much of London's Shoreditch. In Soviet times, this was the Kalinin industrial complex, where locomotives were repaired. Today, Telliskivi is an example of urban renewal done well, and a haven for startups and artists. People come here in droves to eat, shop, visit the Fotografiska museum, or catch a show. No point in hiding it though, the big draw for me is Lamu, an ice cream parlor known for its strange flavors. Telliskivi is actually part of the pretty district of Kalamaja, and it's perhaps the most striking example of its revival. Historically, this was Tallinn's main harbor, home to fishermen and fishmongers. In fact, Kalamaja means fish house in Estonian. Things changed in the last quarter of the 19th century here, when Tallinn was connected to St. Petersburg by railroad and factories started to pop up all around the area. That's when the wooden houses making Kalamaja famous were built to accommodate the many factory workers who suddenly moved in. The nicest houses can be found along Salmen Street. Tallinn is full of museums, but I only have time for one. I decide to make it the Seaplane Harbour Maritime Museum, mainly because it gives me the chance to visit a submarine, the British-made Lembit. Launched in 1936, this amazing machine served in the Estonian and then Soviet Navy and was used for laying mines. Walking up and down the Lembit is super interesting. It gives me a pretty good idea of how the sailors on board used to live. Having said that, and mind you, I'm not claustrophobic, I cannot imagine being on one of these things tens of meters underwater. Thanks, but no thanks. After visiting the museum, I head to the eastern edge of Kalamaja. Here, I fell in love with the grittiness and the monumental decay of the Linna Hall, a graffiti-covered relic of the Soviet era, built as a multi-purpose complex meant to host the sailing events of the 1980 Moscow Olympics. This building, which looks like a giant concrete stepped pyramid, lies abandoned on the Tallinn seafront. Locals and tourists enjoy coming here to take in the beautiful views of the city skyline and the Baltic Sea. Just a few minutes later, I find myself in a completely different environment as I stroll around in the beautiful Kadriorg Park. I'm not surprised to learn that this large garden was commissioned by the Russian Tsar Peter I in 1718. Its buildings, reservoirs, and perfectly kept flower beds are fit for a royal palace. Yet another side to this incredibly diverse city. Tallinn has surprised me every step of the way, and it has earned a pretty special place in my heart. I have to say, all of the three Baltic capitals have. It is hard to believe I've waited so long to visit this part of Europe, but I guess it was worth the wait. This was just the first half of my tour of the north. In the next videos, I will take you to Helsinki and Oslo, with a quick stop in Stockholm in between, before traveling to the magical Norwegian fjords. Thanks for watching and stay tuned. Bye!